Hello, my friends! Just a friendly reminder that Concepts and Legends is an official TCG Player affiliate. If you want to buy any RPG or trading cards, just click the affiliate link listed below in the description. It helps us bring better videos to you, and any help from you is greatly appreciated. Tonight's interview is with the thoroughly impressive MTG artist Sidharth Chaturvedi. So sit back, relax, and let's hear what Sid has to say.
Thank you very much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
So I guess first off, you're born in India?
Born in San Francisco, raised in India, then back to the US, and now Germany.
Right. And so you went to school, you got your BA in Miami, right?
I did.
And then you did your master's in San Francisco?
Yep.
And then how did you end up in Germany?
Well, I was free after school. I was freelancing for 2 years before moving into studio work, which didn't last long. So I was working in mobile games at the time and was almost immediately desperate to get out of it. So I was just applying at studios anywhere in the world that I could find them. And this studio I work at, well, a publisher. I work at a publisher called Deep Silver, and they wrote back, and we went through the art test and interviews over a few months and got the job and moved just for work.
Is your family international the way you are, as far as like living in a lot of different places?
Right now, aside from my brother, my parents are back in India, but yeah, they all lived in the US for a long time. They've bounced back and forth a lot.
Is the arts something that's recurring in your family?
Not really. My mom has always drawn and done creative stuff for a hobby, but in terms of work, no, not at all. My brother and I were the first ones to kind of break the mold there.
So your first piece for Magic was The Long Road Home, correct?
Yeah, it was in 2000. I painted it in 2015. I think it came out the next year.
Yeah, it was in Shadows over Innistrad. Now, what I find very interesting about this piece is that the Cathar is coming home and they're war torn from something that's happening, and it's on Innistrad, so we can only imagine what horrible thing it is. But upon a closer inspection, it's the Cathar is very androgynous looking. I'm not sure to make out if it's a he or she, and I was wondering, was that intentional? Because your sketches and stuff that I've seen you when you do them, they're very either decidedly male or decidedly female as far as like anatomy. Is that something that was intentional?
Not so much. The brief called for a female character, but I'm I was also just trying to approach it as this is a this is a very heavily armored knight, is someone in combat. I'm probably not going to be pushing anything like makeup. I'm not trying to make her look svelte or sexy or anything. I was more or less just going for fighter. So it just happened to push in that direction. In general, when I'm painting those characters, I'm trying to go more for what they might look like based on what they're doing.
Right, right. It
So
just
yeah.
I just found it interesting. It was because when it's very, the artwork can be sometimes hard to make out on the cards.
Mhm.
And then when viewing it up close, it was an interesting thing that I saw.
Yeah. And even when I turned it in, I had actually been a little worried that they were going to send it back to me and say she needs to look more like a woman, but
Hmm.
they had no issue with it at all, which I was very happy about.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, I mean, once again, I didn't want to take this knight character returning home after a long battle and then make her look like a model.
Right. Nobody's gonna be glammed up after fighting
No,
monsters on
no.
Innistrad.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I would try, but I probably would get killed very quickly. Um, so I read in an interview that you did on Cool Stuff that when you saw the concept, or I guess the guide for Kaladesh, that you found humor in it. What did you mean by that?
I don't actually remember this.
Well, it was
Like,
you had said that you had talked to, I think it was Vorthos Mike, about how it was interesting that after Shadows over Innistrad, you got a lot of assignments for Kaladesh, and that it was
Oh,
an Indian artist doing an Indian-based thing, and I didn't know if maybe you from your family and actually knowing the actual countryside that you were privy to stuff that they did that.
well, it wasn't so much, not so much. It wasn't funny. It was humorous in that I was just surprised that it showed up because I think at that point, Indian anything had never shown up in any fantasy I'd seen. So it was just funny that almost as soon as I got into Magic, that showed up on my desk.
That's yeah.
Yeah, I don't know that I really drew much on growing up in India for it because like one of the funny things about that set, it was cool to work on. It was cool to get that. It's nice that they're well, they've been doing this for a few years now, but it's nice that they're branching out from kind of the stock fantasy settings. Um, just in general, not because it's India. It's just nice that they're exploring different settings. Um, I couldn't really draw much on living in India because one of the big glaring things in that style guide was no religious iconography.
Yeah, that's tough with
And that's
India.
very difficult to do anything specifically Indian without that.
Yeah, like there's gonna be some Shiva popping up.
Yep. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, I've joked with my friends over the years that just as a piece of fan art, I want to do like a Gear Hulk Ganesh, but that I'm not going to do that. That won't
that
go
would
over
be
well.
that would be amazing though. I mean, people would.
It would also take so long to paint that, like a big filigree Hulk.
That would be an endeavor because especially I'd imagine with the way that you are, and I think that artists that are really talented like you have to be this way. You're sort of frenetic in the way you paint. You can't pull away from it once you're starting on it.
More and more so. I think when I started out, I was very fixated on getting things done quickly and moving through lots of work. And actually, when I started out, Mike Mike, he was actually one of my first art directors when freelancing, and we kind of built our relationship early on because he was coming to me with rush jobs. So I was kind of saving the day at the end in my first year of freelance a lot with him. So that's how I used to work. Nowadays, it takes a very long time to finish a painting because I've gotten a lot more finicky, like you were saying. It wasn't like that when I first started with Magic. Nowadays, it takes a lot longer.
And you seem to be also very focused on doing things in oils versus at the beginning you were doing things digitally, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. When I got into Magic, I was trying really hard to do it with oils because I work in video games for my day job. I'm sitting in Photoshop all day long, all week. So when I get to paint, I want to do anything but look at my screen for
That
more hours.
that makes sense, yeah, because it's like there's not going to be a gap in between. You're just going to you'll burn out.
Yeah. It's kind of gone back now. Now I've started to enjoy a lot of digital work more again, but for a while, just wanted to stay as far away from it as possible. But I also do mainly I love oil painting. That's what I liked doing in school. But when I started in Magic, I just was not ready to do them in oil. I was trying, but they straight up told me that it's going to take you longer to start working on it if you want to do this in oil, just because the polish wasn't there. So it took another 2 years, I think, for the quality to start to match enough that I could turn in a piece in oil and they would send it back and say, this needs more polish.
One of the things that I've also noticed with your pieces, you have at least with Magic, you do seem to like to employ like sort of a cinematic angling. There's always, or not always, but there is a lot of times, and I find it interesting, the sort of like diagonal positioning of the paintings. Is that something that you were inspired by as far as artists that you look up to? Because your Twitter is filled with so many great examples of your people who you do studies of. Where did that stylistic approach come from?
The cinematic angles, a lot of that is just driven by this is what for fantasy art, it has to look awesome. It has to appeal to young people. It has to kind of it shouldn't be too subtle. So a lot of it is just driven by that. But yeah, I've looked at a lot of action illustration, especially I have done a lot of action pieces. So they lend themselves to doing those kind of camera angles, and that so for the same reason it shows up in a lot of the work that I was looking at and inspired by.
Yeah, when you look at a Mighty Leap and a Demonic Pact, it's almost discombobulating because you're sort of plummeting with these characters, and that's unique. That your style is unique in that sense. That's not something that
Yeah, that's like for those, like especially Mighty Leap. That's trying to get that quality where it feels like you're in there with the character. That's something I like to try to do with any picture, whether it's action or not. And that's not so much about like diagonals and camera angles or looking at anyone in particular. That's more of getting into the guts with painting and trying to do things like not just paint the character to look like they're doing something, like doing the leaping action. It's trying to do more of this suggestive stuff, make the whole background have that feeling.
Yeah,
like so that if you took the figure out, it would still have that feeling.
It definitely does. It's almost like you are sort of skydiving with them.
Yeah, I'm glad that came across.
It's yeah, no, it's awesome. It's it's fascinating to look at, especially with the one with the Demonic Pact, like the wings like sprouting. There's so much going on there as far as narrative. It's just it's distinctly you.
It's good to hear.
It's yeah. So one of the things that I was curious about, and actually the painting behind me, and I think, okay, if I can move like right, wrong side, right here, is that a vampire attacking?
No, that bit is a reference to one of my favorite Bouguereau paintings. It's one of my favorites because it's absolutely absurd. I love it. There are two men fighting in it, and one is just in the course of fighting trying to tear the other guy's throat out. So it's not a vampire, but this whole scene was just supposed to be everyone in the room suddenly getting this bloodlust and turning on each other. And I wanted to get a reference into that painting, and it, at least for me, it was a way to get some over-the-top comical violence into it, but not a vampire, no, just a room full of people who have gone nuts and have started attacking each other. Like the one hidden behind you, the two main figures. I have my fiance to thank for this, but one's attacking the other guy with a spoon. So
really,
those are the sort of things I wanted to get in there and just hope that WotC would be okay with it, and they were.
Yeah, I mean that's are there any other like Easter eggs like that, a la like that kind of theme throughout your pieces that you can think of right now? Because I love that kind of stuff.
Generally, no. I'm not nearly informed enough with magic lore to get magic specific Easter eggs in. Usually, if I can get away with it, I do like to try to sneak some silly stuff in. Usually I end up not doing that just because like I don't know how to hide it well enough. But in this piece, I managed to get some of it in there just because it's so wild and the whole situation lends itself to more comic moments.
It's great. There's one piece, and I have to mention it, but it's one of your earlier. It's not sure if it's a painting, or I think it's a painting, but I'm not sure because I'm an idiot. Could be markers, but it's called Ass to Ass, and it's funny. I mean, it's
oh my god, you've seen that painting? It's still in the internet.
It is still in the internet, and it is on your blog, I think.
Oh wow, I didn't know my blog even turns up anywhere. Yeah, that's barely an illustration. My friend Rob and I, Rob is a friend who works at Gearbox. We, in our freelance days, we used to do a live stream, And at some point we didn't have work to do that we could show, and we were just trying to figure out ways to keep it entertaining. So we were at that point, we just started taking suggestions from the audience, and that was one of the ones that came up, and so I ran with it.
That's as my people say, it's a chutzpah. I was like, that's awesome, because you have like you did a lot of punny stuff back in the day. Like a Space Invader was one that I really enjoyed, where
Yeah, I did enjoy that.
and I feel like I feel like there is a comedian that is lurking in there, and I'm encouraging it. I think you should do
it. It is fun, and I don't think I could keep that stuff out if I wanted to. Like occasionally I'll try to go really dark with like a horror piece or something, but even there's always this small element of silliness to it, and I can't keep it out, and I don't think I'd want to. It just comes out no matter what I'm painting.
Right, because even in the classic Victorian horror, I mean, you have to sort of have a little bit of an eyebrow raised, because you look at modern day like villains like I'm dating myself, but Freddy Krueger, there's an element of you have to be a little arch with it.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, absolutely. And even if you're going for like this one, Disrupt Decorum, it's supposed to be violent and chaotic, and with a horror piece, it's horror, but you're not trying to make anyone feel miserable from looking at it. So right. It still should be a little entertaining, and humor is just my way of doing that a lot of times, even if it's subtle. Like I don't want someone to get depressed looking at it.
I agree, but then I will say that you do not veer away from the like balls to the wall horror like of Zat's Will, where like that's a woof. Like I think that goes into like Vincent Pross dark territory. Like that one, I'm like, oh, that is just, you guys are tapping in the darkness. I thought maybe you probably watched Night of the Living Dead as a youth, because that's like that's the kind of nihilism that George Romero would have loved.
Yeah, come to think of it, that's probably the farthest I've ever pushed in that direction.
Yeah, it's brutal. I was playing with my group of friends, and I was like, look at this, and they're like, what, that's a guy screaming in a room. I'm like, no, look closer. And they're like, oh. I'm like, eh. It's what was the direction for that? And what part of that came from your own?
The direction was actually very close to what turned up in the piece. It did call for the guy being sort of swallowed in this sea of faces, overwhelmingly dark and black, and these tentacles coming out of it. And I think that was the sketch we went with for the final was probably one of the first things I drew. It's there.
It's interesting too, because even though and I'm not quite sure how to even phrase it, but it's sort of like a mirrored version of the ones where you're plummeting with the characters, whereas in this one you're obviously not in it, but because you're watching it directly from above, it's just as hooked in.
Mm-hmm.
As
it creates that feeling of sinking into it instead.
Yeah, and the helplessness of watching it and being not within reach. It sort of mirrors what I've heard people say drowning is like, as far as the most psychologically terrifying way to die, because you know what you need and you can see what you need. Usually when you're drowning, you can see this where the sun is, and that's where the air is. And
right, and even the facial expression kind of has that, because again, the main feeling in there is sinking. So I don't know if I was explicitly thinking of drowning, but I definitely was thinking of just that feeling of getting pulled under. So all of that kind of goes along with drowning. Yeah.
I like the lithographs that you did of, and I was wondering, have you ever read the annotated Dracula? Because it reminded me so much of what was in that book.
Lithographs?
Well, okay, so it looks like I checked this out. I thought I was using the right term, but when you do very thin lines to create a sort of etched sort of drawing type thing,
Ah, okay.
and
Right. Yeah, that's those are actually just straight up pen and ink. But
that's
yeah,
really
the look is very similar to lithograph because whenever I've done the very thin hatching and ink work, I'm looking at another artist, Franklin Booth, he developed his style literally because he was in his day copying what he thought were pen and ink drawings, and they were etchings.
wow. So he accidentally trained himself into like a machine as far as proficiency,
Oh yeah.
and you did the same thing.
Not so much. It was just me trying to. Whenever I do that, I'm just trying to learn from that style and try to use it. But I definitely nowhere near that level of machine-like detail.
I mean, it's I put one next to the other. I'd be like, I mean, you do that with pen. Like, what happens if you like sneeze or blink? I mean, that's just
That's part of the fun of it. If you sneeze, the piece is gone. You need to redo it.
I mean, that's what I would do. I would sneeze on it. I would be just, it would be a wreck, but you know, like,
That's part of the fun. Doing one of those pieces, I mean, with a pen, at least there's some leeway. You have some control. Doing it with a brush is even worse. But it's also fun. It's a different kind of challenge. You have to do a lot of preparation. It forces a different type of thinking because you know you can't make a mistake. So it just changes the decisions you make, and it's really good training.
what's the story behind Six Hanging Men?
I was reading, there's an Indian epic, the Mahabharata. I was reading that maybe 2 years ago. I did not finish it, but I've always read abridged versions as a kid. It's one of the Indian, like Hindu stories I really, really like. So I was trying to read the full version, and I did not get very far. It's a difficult read.
And
It's
what is the genre? Is it like,
it's just myth. Um, it's an ancient Hindu story, and it has like probably hundreds of little stories within it. And one of them is a story of a sage walking around in the woods and comes across these 6 or 7 hanging men. And it's a sort of allegorical story. In the story, there's all sorts of stuff like these sages are hanging by their feet from a tree, and then it goes into stuff like there's a mouse on the tree, it's chewing away at the vines, and they're hanging over a vast chasm. And it goes into explaining like the mouse represents this, the vine represents this, and yada yada yada. I jettisoned all of that, but when I read the story, I just got that image very vividly in my head and wanted to paint it.
yeah, and I mean, I'd imagine with that kind of image, you got to work that out, or you're gonna be, that's gonna stay in your head
Oh
until
yeah.
you got to evacuate that.
Yeah, and it unfortunately doesn't happen too much these days just because I'm constantly working on something else. So when it does happen, if I'm doing work like Magic or D&D or just anything for a job, more of the challenge is I've gotten the brief. Now I kind of have to beat an image out of it. Uh,
Right.
Getting just a very clear image flashing in my head and having to work to get it out, that doesn't happen so regularly. So when it does, it's like, okay, just go with it, make it happen.
Yeah, I was wondering about that. I was like, what sort of, I mean, so is it like literature that will, I mean, obviously that can trigger it, but where do the like the images for your pieces come from when you are inspired?
All over the place. It used years ago, I would get inspired by a song more often, not so much anymore. I'm more likely to be listening to a podcast than music nowadays.
Right?
But yeah, um, used to be music. A lot of it was from reading fiction, which also I don't do as much anymore. That one came from reading, like I said, an Indian myth. They can come from anywhere. There's a painting I had up everywhere for a long time of three kids in a tree, and
The damn kids.
yeah,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
one, like, uh, I was good. That one's from 2014 or 15, so it's pretty old now. But I had a lot of people. It doesn't look like anything in my portfolio, so I had a lot of people, like even my mom, asking where this came from. I don't even interact with kids. Why would I even know what to do here? That one literally came from reading like an early 20th century fitness manual, and the guy talking about his childhood, and a story very similar to that being written there.
And yet you still it's interesting because it is, and I mean but the kids are all sort of like swinging on the tree, and yet with the way and I say the camera, but the camera so to speak is positioned, it's just really cool the way your work sort of doesn't infringe on it, and you take a lot of really interesting angles that if you're not good at what you do, then it's gonna glare. But I just see it and I'm like, wow, these are like, it took me a lot of time sort of like studying your work before I even caught on what was happening.
Yeah.
And
I mean, I'm glad that works out. I definitely don't want, I mean, most of the time, with some exceptions, like Six Hanging Men, I definitely don't want, okay, that's going too far. Usually the first sketch I've made is the wrong one. I need to spend some time finding it. Six Hanging Men was an exception, but and even that took a very long time to get it to work properly. Just because in that case, there's an image in my head. I know what the camera angle is supposed to look like, but once I'm actually on paper, it never looks right. And I have to kind of play with it to get the camera angle working, to get everything to look proper. And
I mean, that's
that damn kids painting was the same way. It just took a very long time to get everything set up properly.
and it taps into like your Norman Rockwell inspiration. It's got that feel to it.
That's what I was going for there. And I've had on my to-do list for something like 6 years now, make more paintings like this, and I just never get around to it.
I mean, yeah, that's, I mean, that's tough too, because you don't really, you're not given any sort of assignments that are going to call for that. And there's not a lot of people, I could see people being sort of unintentionally jaded towards Rockwell if they're idiots, but
Yeah.
But the fact that he is so wholesome, and he has like such a very, it's antiquated, but it's genuine like point of view.
Yeah, and but the funny thing is, like, again, with magic, for sure, there's very little opportunity to get that kind of work in, but once in a while it happens. Like, there's a D&D piece of it's called Walking Statue of Waterdeep that I did a few years ago, and I managed to sneak two like shocked kids poking their heads out of a window, and it's very much this Rockwell-ish quality that wasn't in the brief, but on the rare occasion I do manage to sneak it in, people love it. It's like they definitely won't. I have never gotten a reaction to those that was like, this is old hat, this is too wholesome, this isn't gritty and real.
Yeah, no, I don't feel like that would be, and again, it's like, I feel like if anybody even came at Rockwell with that critique, I would be like, sorry for you. But
I've heard it so much, and I don't like it. It makes you wonder, like, have you ever been to a small town? Like, why would you think people don't live these lives?
Yeah, it's sort of, yeah, I'm almost, yeah, it's like, well, I get it. Maybe you think everybody grew up in an urban setting, and that
exactly,
and that the 1950s didn't happen, and
mm-hmm.
but it did.
Yeah, exactly. Like, just this idea that everyone lives like they do in New York.
Right. Yeah, everybody, yeah, Manhattan is, it's just like everywhere else. I mean, that's why they film every movie there, because everybody lives in Manhattan. I'm in Manhattan right now. No. But I love Manhattan, don't get me wrong.
By the way.
Huh?
Where are you based, by the way?
I'm in Naples, Florida, so
Oh,
I
okay.
have the air conditioning pumping so I don't sweat myself into a stupor in my jacket.
So the rest of the country is buried in snow.
Yeah, and I'm bitching. I just realized that. But you know what? What can I say?
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
I've lived in Florida. I remember.
oh yeah, Miami. Oof. I mean, yeah, I would end up sweating on my paintings. What would be a painter that's either living or dead if you could have them for a dinner? Who would that painter be?
Howard Pyle.
I thought you might say that. Why would you choose him? Obviously, I know why, but I'm interested to hear your sort of your
Well,
way you got into him.
so I got into him a few years ago. So one of the guys I've learned probably most, maybe 90% of anything I've learned about art for the last few years is a comic artist named Kev Ferrara. And I got to know him literally because something like 10 years ago, I started stalking him on the internet. And eventually he started paying attention to me, and that's how I know him. But
It
he
works.
was, it works really well. This was back in the era of like conceptart.org, when we had the art board that everyone in every artist field was on, before it kind of splintered into all the different subgroups again. So he was always talking about the Brandywine artists and Howard Pyle. So that's how I found them. And I love Howard Pyle's work, obviously, but I would, he's at the head of almost the entire last century of American illustration. Like all of the ideals they were going for, all of, at least the American illustration I love, they were Howard Pyle's students and grand students. They were teaching and trying to paint from his principles. And in his time, he went back on this later in his life, but when he was teaching for his entire life, he was very much against trying to study the European masters because he wanted to make this distinctly American art. And at the end of his life, he went to Europe and saw these things in person for the first time and took it all back.
Oh no,
But
that's tough for him because he's like, oh, he did that though.
It's a weird thing, but in its own way, it worked because he did manage to practically invent what we think of as American illustration because of that kind of bullheadedness about it.
Yeah, I mean,
and he also had probably this idea about European painting because at that time they were looking at terrible black and white reproductions of it. He didn't see these things in person until much later.
right. I mean, but that's that's trailblazing because it takes a lot of guts as an artist to say, I'm purposefully not going to view what I know is good work.
Yeah, and we have kind of the opposite problem in a lot of ways nowadays. We're just drowning in influences.
Right.
It's much more difficult to pick a few. I don't want to say pick a few artists because you're not trying to copy them, but just pick a few sets of principles to focus on.
Well, yeah, because everybody I mean, in order to be a better, they say, order to be a better athlete, you're supposed to play against somebody who can, kick your ass. And
Yes.
And that's how it works with art too, is that you need to you study people who would be able to kick your ass. And
that well, there's that, and it's also just helpful to, at least in the beginning, have a narrower set of principles that you try to master instead of getting pulled apart by everything. Yeah, like I mean, very early on, my set of influences and art just was all over the place. In the last few years, it narrowed down considerably to like the Brandywine artists and a few others. Before that, it used to include all of my contemporaries, all of like the top of the illustration field, and I still love a lot of that work. It took a long time to whittle down what kind of work I want to make. So yeah, it is different. You actually kind of have to consciously chop out influences and focus on something for a while.
Right, yeah, because I've heard that there's a lot of people, a lot of musicians when they're recording an album, um, it's and I for the young people out there, musicians are people who played instruments and write, but it's sort of tough to when you're doing that to you have to sort of you have to not listen to anything because you might accidentally like do a motif on something that somebody already did, and I think that's tough because you can't not steal. I mean, we're humans, we can't,
Yeah,
we have to
of
imitate
course.
each other, like
Yeah, and we're not trying to reinvent the wheel every time. You'll have influences, you will be borrowing things. But yeah, you don't want to have so many that it just turns into a gray goo and it just can't ever focus on anything.
how did you and I won't keep you for much longer, but how did you get to do the portrait of Christopher Hitchens? Because I saw that and I miss him very much as
Oh
a
yes,
writer.
more and more.
Right, I mean, I'm like, what would he be right? I mean, I kind of would just like, what would he say about this and that and this and
Yep,
that? I couldn't even make it
exactly.
through his final book.
Yeah,
Because it was
and it's nothing to do with the particular politics. It's just you want to know what would he have written about this?
about
What
anything.
and what entertaining thing would like insightful thing would he have written?
Yeah, it's how did you get that gig? Because it's a fantastic portrait.
That
I've actually
thank you.
seen it before as a fan of
Oh,
Hitchens.
oh wow. I'm surprised to hear that. That actually wasn't a gig. That when I was in San Francisco, there is a gallery I showed in very briefly called Modern Eden, and they had a group show called Notorious, and you could pick whoever you wanted to paint just to fit that theme. And my thinking at the time, I was also listening to a lot of Hitchens. I unfortunately only found out about him after he died. That's how I found out about him
Oh,
from
that's tough.
everyone. Yeah, from everyone like mourning that he had died. So, oh, who's this? And that's when I got into his work. Um, but yeah, the theme of that show was Notorious, and my thinking was I don't want to take this theme and just paint someone horrible like they're notorious for being like a mass murderer.
Right.
So I was listening to him at the time, and it seemed like the right way to go because anything he said stirred up people fighting about it.
Yeah, he was so good. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I mean, and I mean, and I encourage everybody to read his letters to a young contrarian. If you
That's
are,
a great one.
God, I mean, I read that when I was like 23, and
Oh, they're just the right time.
right, yeah. I mean, I I got it then so much, and then I got older, and I'm like, I went dumb again. I'm like, I need a sharpener. I'm just like, where's Christopher Hitchens? I want to know what he is.
I've actually, I think just today or yesterday, I was telling my fiance, I used to really enjoy arguing a lot more. I fell out of practice, and now I'm scared to do it.
Right, it's like getting older for me. I've sort of become, I guess I'm chiller, and it's like, that's weird. I used to not be chill. I mean, I'm not chill by grand standards, but by me, it's like I'm on the inside, I'm really kind of like this painting behind me. But yes, even when I sleep, yeah, no, I just saw that and I was like, I'm not gonna lie. I saw that it's still available at the gallery, and I was like, yeah, I think I might have to. And I'm just so like, if anybody hears about it, don't go to the website. It's not there. So just because I
Oh
need
man,
it.
I'm surprised. Like it's been there a long time. I'm surprised they still have it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I hope they have it because the website says they have it. I'll be super
Okay.
bummed if they
Man,
don't.
I'm partly wondering where they keep this stuff. I think I painted that in 2013, and it was a small gallery.
I will be. Rumor is that somebody will be finding out soon about it because there's an interested party. That's definitely not me. It's me. But so yeah, I saw that. And I was just like, and he would have loved that too because I've seen a lot of articles where he did actual proper interviews where his pieces where art pieces were included, and you know that he had a say in everything that was published about him. Like he was not shy about
No.
stuff, and he definitely was. He definitely. I mean, I'm speaking on his behalf. He would have loved it. But he would have loved it. It's just a great painting, and it's cool to also. That's another example of you sort of having that mastery of all these different levels, because it's just a straight up portrait, and you don't get to see that side from you a lot either as an
Not
artist.
much. No, but thank you. Yeah, I mean, I was just out of school at that time, and like I said, my training was in oil painting, so it was mostly fine art, just figure, portraiture, landscape, all the good basics for quite a few years.
I'm curious about the currently the number of works. Do you know the approximate number of works that you're doing for Magic for the upcoming sets? I know that you can't give out certain details, but just a count, because I love to hear like what amount we can expect.
For the next few sets, I'm not really sure. I think over the next year, like just based on how much I actually do far less Magic work than people think I do. I think just the incessant spamming on social media makes it seem like there are a lot more paintings coming out. But like in 2020, I did 10 Magic paintings. So just based on the release schedule, that's probably the most that will come out this year,
Cool.
unless something gets bumped forward.
I mean, it's and maybe I also think too, because the cards that you do end up painting, they just happen to end up being on really good cards as far as either getting a lot of play in standard or being commander staples. I mean, you can't play a life gain deck without an Ajani's Pridemate. It's just not going to happen. I mean, it would be insane. I don't know. Do you play any Magic at all, or do you?
No, I have not. The barrier to entry has always been just a little too high, and it's just the time sink. So I haven't gotten into it.
Yeah, I was like, I built my well, I didn't build, I bought my first deck, which was Edgar Markov, which had Disrupt Decorum in it, and I was just like, is there a vampire deck? I like vampires, and my friend's like, yeah. I was like, that's the one. I'll take that one. I build decks around artwork. Like, I will lose the game, but I'll be like, it looks good, so it doesn't really matter. I'm like,
that's one way to do it.
Yeah, it's yeah. So it's so I don't know. Maybe that would be a way for you to get into it. I'd be like, just choose a theme artistically and go with it. It's fun that way.
The funny thing is, starting around 2 years ago, my close group of friends, 3 of them really got into Magic. So that would have been the time to do it. But like over the last year, because of lockdowns, they couldn't meet and play so easily. So everyone's kind of moved out of it now. So I don't know. At some point, maybe. Yeah. I mean, I get the cards. I have them sitting here from WotC.
I mean, yeah, you got there's some bombs in there, like Hullbreacher. It exploded. That card, I mean, it's gone off. It's like,
I believe so.
Oh, it is. I mean, it's a bomb. It's good stuff. But is there anything else that you are working on now that you would like to talk about or give a shout out to before I let you go?
Work-wise, not really. I have a pretty boring day-to-day life. It's just day job, video games, evening, Magic, or D&D. So nothing in particular to draw attention to right now. Hopefully I'll do some more personal work this year. And yeah, hopefully some of the new Magic work will come out soon.
You got some images percolating now as far as personal work?
I have stuff that I would like to get to, and I'm hoping to get to if there is a gap between the freelance this year. Like last year, I got 2 personal pieces, and like right at the beginning of lockdown, it was the 6 Hanging Men and another one, Ganesh. So if I get another 2 in this year, that'll be progress.
You did you do Ganesh was that the one for your mom?
No. She is asking for it, but that was just another one I've had on my mind for years.
Yeah, like I saw that picture of you and your mom. It looks like you guys look like you're at an award show or something. I was like, huh.
that was my cousin's wedding.
Yeah, it's you say your mom has some like amazing taste in clothes. I was the only time I've ever seen clothes like that was I actually was covering the Bollywood Awards in Tampa, and
There you go.
and those people were showed up in stuff that, and I was like, wow. I was clearly at the time I was wearing a My Bloody Valentine 3D shirt, and I was like, oh, one of these birds is not like the other.
So stood out a bit.
Well, yeah, I also was like, I snuck into, it's like, I snuck into a thing that Kevin Spacey was doing. This was before we knew what had happened. And he was doing a chat with, she's the star of like I forget her name. Shoot. But she's the star of the FBI show. God, this is going to kill me. She's gorgeous. I'm failing. God, I'm gonna feel like an idiot. But I feel like an idiot. But I snuck in really early because there was no press allowed, and I just sat down, pretended like I was supposed to be there, and nobody said anything. And then all these dignitaries started walking in. The lady who starred one of the actress from House of Cards came in, and who ended up, all these people came in who later on that night I found out that they were performing at the Bali. I was in the room with like India's like the Brad Pitts of India and the Angelina Jolies, and I'm 6 feet tall and like white and just giant and but I stood out. But I saw your mom, and I was like, I wonder what if like she was in the Bollywood Awards. So props to her.
No, that's just what Indian weddings look like. We do like our bling.
It's nice. Well, well, thank you so much again for taking the time today. It was awesome.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for reaching out. I appreciate it.
And have a good day.
You too. Take care, man.
Bye.
Well, that is what Sid said, and I say he said a lot. I'm sorry. I know, it's just bad script writing. But listen, I've written like 5 of them today, and I am suffering from treacle brain. Nevertheless, I would like to remind everyone to like and subscribe to be entered in the weekly card giveaway. Well, that's all for tonight. Until next time, treacle time, I got a scoop.